Last weekend, my family and I attended the first annual California Assembly District 51 Community Excellence Awards. District 51 encompasses nearly all of Los Angeles, from Santa Monica in the west to Griffith Park in the east. So it shouldn't surprise you to know that our district is both the state's gayest and most Jewish. Shout out to my bros. Many awards were bestowed. Small Business of the Year, Nonprofit of the Year, Man of the Year, which was not me. I, along with two other outstanding Angelinos, was honored with the Community Excellence Award for combating anti-Semitism, or anti-Jew bigotry, as we call it on this show. My parents, wife, and children came with me, and I certainly felt good seeing how proud they were of me. But honestly, and as I said in my acceptance speech, I wish this award did not exist for me to receive. Man, how I wish that today, in America, in Los Angeles, we didn't need to recognize people for defending Jews from bigots. Not a great look, 2024. Not a great look. But I also remarked on how amazing it was to receive a Jewish honor in a decidedly non-Jewish forum. That's rather unusual. In fact, this monologue is not about me winning the award. It's actually about the man who presented it to me. You see, the Community Excellence Awards are the brainchild of Rick Chavez Zibur, my District 51 California State Assembly member. Rick is not your typical politician. There's not a whiff of deal-seeking or personal ambition or insincerity about him. He's just a guy, humble, kind, and approachable, who cares about people and wants to help them. Rick has a long career of serving others, most notably as a leading activist for the gay community, of which he is a part, in particular serving as executive director of the country's largest statewide LGBTQ+ civil rights organization, Equality California. So it's reasonable to expect he'd continue to be a strong leader for his own community as a state politician. But what's reasonable to expect of a person in regards to a community that is not his or her own? Well, let's look at more evidence. It was Rick who first connected with me and asked me to dinner to better understand the needs of the LA Jewish community. It was Rick who told me our district was the most Jewish in the state and how seriously he took that responsibility. It was Rick who joined the 18-person state legislative Jewish caucus, despite, not being Jewish. And it was Rick who issued a firm, clear statement of solidarity with Israel after October 7th, without equivocation or the progressive word salad so in fashion with many Democratic politicians today. So I'll ask the question again. How much responsibility is it reasonable to expect someone outside your identity-based community to shoulder on your behalf? The answer, epitomized by Rick Zibur, is a lot. We have enormous capacity to take responsibility for the well-being of our fellow human beings, regardless of if they're one of us or not. We used to know this, to be sincere in our desire to feel connected to humanity before our cynicism told us it was lame or Pollyanna-ish or passé somewhere along the line. But we all need help at one time or another. And right now, the Jews need help. To my thoughtful, engaged, open-hearted, non-Jewish audience, if you're even hearing this monologue, you're already showing up. And that really matters. But I'm afraid we must ask more of you because we cannot turn the overwhelming tide of hate alone. We need your hands in ours right now and for the long haul. We need your love and support like never before. I'm reminded of something my dad's mom, my dear Grandma Sue of blessed memory, taught me. Whenever someone we care about experiences the death of someone they care about, there's that moment of hesitation, the pause. Do I say something now? Do I go over to their house? Do I text? Do I call? Do I wait? What's the appropriate move? And what my Grandma Sue would always say and do is just go. When someone is in need, you go. None of the other considerations matter. Let's be honest. They're mostly self-generated attempts to protect you from having to encounter a difficult emotional moment. But believe me, those pure, proactive moments of light in the darkest hours often mean the most. Allyship is no different. Don't hesitate. If you've been waiting for permission to take on our charge as your own, consider this it. We want you involved, enmeshed, responsible. Send the text, make the call, share the post, call out the bigotry, buy the Hanukkah gift, score an invite for Shabbat. We need you with us in any and every way. And if you ever feel stuck or hit that moment of hesitation, I also give you permission to think of my Grandma Sue's words of wisdom. Just go. This is the 15th episode of Being Jewish with me, Jonah Platt. One of the questions I receive most frequently since I launched Being Jewish is, when are you going to have an Orthodox guest on? After all, one of the goals of this podcast is to illuminate the full spectrum of Jewish identity. Well, my friends, I'm in New York City, home to the second largest population of Jews in the world, so it wasn't too hard to find a really interesting Orthodox one. My esteemed guest is a Haredi thought leader and scholar, offering insight on Jewish texts through a number of platforms, including his successful podcast, Headlines Halakha, which explores current events through the prism of Torah. He is the author of several books of Halacha commentary, a husband and father, and, a billionaire real estate mogul whose Lightstone Group is one of the top 30 apartment owners in the United States. Please welcome David Lichtenstein.
Nice to be here, June.
Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. Do you prefer to go by David or David, or do you quote code switch for audiences?
Code switch for audiences.
All right, nice. So David, David, it all works. Also, are you a rabbi? Because the internet is inconclusive on that point.
I was trained as a rabbi, but I don't like to be a practicing rabbi because when you get into the world of business, mistakes happen, and I don't need somebody saying, "Oh, the rabbi did this or the rabbi did that." So I go as unrabbi.
Okay, there you go. I like it. But you've got the training.
I got the training.
Okay, fantastic. So usually my conversations on this program are focused very much on the individual, and of course this still will be, but I'm also looking for you to be somewhat of an ambassador for the Haredi community, as you're the first I've had on the show, and it's a world that's quite unfamiliar to those outside of it. So to begin, how would you define just what it means to be Haredi, and is your own personal connection to it different in any way from the standard definition?
The word Haredi means to be fearful, and it means to be fearful of God, something that's not in abundance in the world right now,
right?
Or certainly not in the United States. So it means people who live their life based upon the Torah, and it's the main focus of their lives, and that's what they think about, and that's what they worry about. So if you ask a Haredi fellow, like, what are you most worried about vis-a-vis somebody else? Somebody would say, well, I'm worried about my business. Ooh, I'm worried about my relationship. I'm worried about how my kids will do. I'm worried about the economy, global warming. If you ask that question to a Haredi guy, he would say, I'm worried about my relationship with God. Because that sort of controls all of the above.
Right. So it's not like you're not considering all of the above. It's just under an umbrella of, first and foremost, it's about the connection to God.
Yes, we believe that, for the most part, God runs the world.
Yeah. Can you break down these labels for me? Haredi, ultra-Orthodox, modern Orthodox, just Orthodox. Like, what is the difference or overlap between those?
So Haredi and ultra-Orthodox would very often have very similar connotations. Modern Orthodox are people who have sort of integrated more into the world. So their kids can go to Ivy League schools. YU has its own college. Haredim, for the most part, are not particularly fond of college. They do training post yeshiva, but
like vocational training,
real estate training, insurance training, et cetera, code training, accounting training. Lakewood, which has the largest Orthodox yeshiva outside of Israel, has almost 2,000 guys have graduated and become accountants, and over 600 of them are in big four firms.
Wow.
Yeah, because, they're scholars, so it's very easy for them to sort of move from being a scholar here to a scholar there.
Right.
So that's how I would define Haredi or ultra-Orthodox and vis-a-vis modern Orthodox. Orthodox is someplace in the middle. In other words, where you part of the family is Haredi, or you believe in some of the Haredi teachings, but not all of the Haredi teachings. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Going to the army in Israel, hotly disputed.
Yeah.
The Haredim will not do it.
Right.
The modern Orthodox will. The Orthodox, maybe they'll go up for Miluim, maybe they'll do partial service. So it's sort of like,
Yeah, there's our spectrum.
Yeah.
When you say that Haredim not into college, what's that about?
I have a friend who was the head of a major department in Columbia.
Okay.
And she said that every single semester, kids come into her class wearing a kippah and leave without a kippah. Because the overriding, kids believe what they're taught by their professors.
Right.
We see that.
Yeah.
In so many different areas. For better or for worse. There is a tremendous power to teaching young people. And we have a very sacred path that goes back. It's the oldest. We go back 3,500 years, right before Muhammad was even a twinkle in his mother's eye, or for that matter, Jesus, etc. Right? So we have it, and it's very sacred to us to keep it. And I think that we're very aware of the tremendous sacrifice of our grandparents had, a life-threatening sacrifice to keep us as Jewish. And when somebody goes away, they're breaking a chain of 3,500 years, and that's what they're scared about.
What if there were some way, and I know this is so hypothetical, what if there was a way to safeguard it? Like, no, I promise no matter what, I'm going to remain completely faithful to my Jewish traditions, my identity, everything, and I still want to go doing all this other stuff in the modern world. Would that change the calculus?
I just think that's difficult. You really, really believe it until you meet a beautiful girl who's not Orthodox, or maybe not Jewish. And we've all seen that, right? So, commitment, I think that psychologists say that willpower is remarkably weak. How many times have people said, I'm going to lose those pounds? And they keep at it for a day, and then they go to a party, and there's a 7-layer cake. There's a strawberry shortcake there, and the cream is luscious, and this and that. And suddenly it goes out the window. So we know that willpower is, and therefore creating sort of social barriers, creating things that go beyond willpower. I think a much better way to diet is not to say, when I look at that strawberry shortcake, I'm just going to look the other way. And the better thing is, maybe stay away from restaurants that have really good food for a few months. It's a much better recipe to lose weight.
You're also missing out on some pretty great restaurants.
That's for sure.
What are the biggest misconceptions about the Orthodox community that you've seen or heard?
I think one big misconception is that people look at Orthodox as almost like a different sect. But, just like humans, if you say an animal and a human, they're 99% genetically. I think most of the struggles they have are just so similar to everybody else's struggles. Struggles about health issues or weight issues or love issues or spousal issues or family issues. So much of it is, so it's tinted by a belief, but for the most part, they're really like you. When I say you, I don't mean you personally,
sure.
Joan. I mean in general.
Like anybody else.
Yeah.
Right. And what would you say are one of or some of the biggest challenges that the Orthodox community is facing internally?
I think one big challenge is that the iPhone has torn down barriers. Like it used to be when we were young, if you wanted to see some illicit material, you had to steal someplace in and you had to lie about your age and this and that. And today you have 12-year-old kids with unfettered access to the internet.
Yeah.
Which is really bizarre in a way. There was just a story where a mother, some kid got involved with a chatbot and committed suicide. And the mother is saying, she's suing the chatbot, and he shot himself with his father's gun. And my first thing is why did his father give him access to his gun?
Right.
But why did the kid at 12 or 13 have unfettered access to the internet? So the internet has broken down all barriers when it comes to, you can look at anything. Any faith issue gets challenged. Any sexual identity issue gets challenged. Right now, they're really scared, I think rightfully so.
Yeah.
There are really lots of bad people out there. And the iPhone has broken down these barriers. And I think that is something that is particular concern to rightfully so, to the Orthodox community.
Just so people don't think we have an Apple animus, I think you mean smartphones in general,
right? Smartphones,
Yeah.
I'm not, yeah.
How much of your Jewish identity, and if you can even separate this out, is based in faith and spirituality versus text, values, ritual?
I think it's both. Rituals really are an integral part of who we are, of what our identity is. That's certainly a big part of religion, is the cultural part. But then Judaism is much deeper than that. We have faith, we have learning, we have study. I mean, we have study on almost every imaginable topic. You know, it's like I write on Jewish law, contemporary Jewish law. So I'm writing about now if they can attach a bionic arm to a soldier who lost his arm, could he put his tefillin on that arm?
Interesting.
And there are sources in Talmud that would bring you. So our study is just so rich. And when you look at the Jewish people and the collective amount of wisdom and the collective amount of science and math and just brains that they brought to the world, it mostly comes from Talmudic training, right? So we have such a history of being literate. Do you know that you go back to 1900 and 70% of people were not literate?
Right.
And the Jewish community was 90% were literate. So it's both tradition, it's both culture, but it's also study and faith.
I love that answer. Last thing I want you to help me define for the audience. I mentioned the word halakha a number of times in my intro. I've actually said it on this show before, but how do you define it, and why is unpacking it so central to how you spend your life?
So halakha means Jewish law. It starts with the Bible, it goes to the Mishnah, goes to the Talmud, and then goes afterwards to the Book of Laws, the Shulchan Aruch, our daily life. And we live according to those laws, right? But those laws have to keep unfolding, right? I mean, if you go to a rabbi about internet addiction, he'll tell you what to do, and he'll give you a recipe. Moses never heard of internet addiction.
Of course not.
Right. Well, like when I spoke about bionic arms,
right? Exactly.
It just goes on and on. The change, the rapid, tattoos. I mean, there are just so endless things that have halachic surrogate motherhood.
Right.
And so we have to take the ancient law, right? But it's written to be eternal, and make it contemporary, bring it into contemporary. And that's what halachists have been doing for the last 2,000 years.
Studying Torah, as you said, is, the focal point of Haredi life study. But also your father was a rabbi, if I'm not mistaken. So how much of a role do you think his rabbinic influence played on your path versus just, your general upbringing?
I think my father was the most influential person in my life. Ironically, my father had no interest in business. He was a rabbi. And he, on a few occasions, told me, he said, why do you work anymore? Like, how many pieces of chicken can you eat? He had no understanding of it.
Yeah.
Right? He lived in a very spiritual world. So I've taken some of what he taught. The world I live in is a much more integrated world.
Right.
If I was a truly spiritual person, I wouldn't be doing what I was doing.
Right.
Right.
He had other interests.
My father once told me a story. He said there was once a scholar who said, this world, it's not for me. I want to live in a spiritual world. So he started giving away all his clothing, his artifacts. He kept a cup to be able to drink from. And then he went down to the river and he saw a farmer bending down and drinking from his hands. He took the cup and he threw it away. And I think that he, to a certain extent, did live that way. It's like people sometimes ask me, was your father wealthy? And I say, my father was very, very wealthy. He just didn't have any money.
Okay, so let's get into your business life a little bit. The Lightstone Group. In 1986, you purchased a multifamily home in New Jersey on credit card debt, and now you have a multi-billion-dollar real estate empire. What was the feeling like taking that first big risk?
I'll tell you the story. My wife was expecting our second kid.
How many children do you have?
5.
5.
My wife was expecting our second kid. I was in yeshiva, and they were paying me $40 a week. It was just impossible.
Right.
And my wife just looked at me and said, how are we going to pay the rent? And I said, I better get a job. But I was unhireable because outside of a rabbi, which also would have paid minimally.
Right.
You go, hi, what's your background? Like Talmud?
Right.
So it's amazing how necessity drives you to afford, willingly or unwillingly. And that's what happened. It was a sort of, I had to do it. I had no choice.
How has Halakha and your Jewish values guided your business decisions?
HR just sent me a note that we were rated out of 100,000 companies in New York City, top 40 to work for.
Wow. Congratulations.
But what does that mean? That means people rarely leave. They're treated with respect. We have more vacation days than anybody. We have more holidays than everybody, and it's treat others as you would like to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
And to a certain extent, I say, hey, that's part of my the way I was brought up.
Right. Those are the guiding values, and
Yeah.
there they are in your company.
Yeah.
What about how they've guided you as a property owner, those values? Because as I'm sure you're aware, there is a perception, whether it's true or not, I'm not qualified to say, that some Orthodox Jewish landlords, especially in low-income neighborhoods of color, are, like slumlords.
It's very easy to take an Orthodox owner and say, he's so different looking, and he's the owner, and he's the landlord. Like, put it this way. In the United States, there are I don't know, 30, 40 million apartments.
Okay.
All the Orthodox owners in the world own 50,000 apartments. So that means it's a fraction of a percent of a percent,
Mm-hmm.
but they're so colorable.
Right.
You know what I mean? But could we do things better? The answer is absolutely.
What about, and I wasn't trying to sort of lump you in as with the whole group. I'm interested individually how you bring Jewish principles to the way that you are as a landlord.
As having religion as part of the recipe of how will you behave, does it make a difference? I think it does. And I don't even think it's Judaism. I think it's, if you're Christian, it's the same thing. When we look at charity, right? I mean, these are studies that have been done. Religious people give more charity.
Right. Well, it's part of the value system.
So I think having part of your value system is do as to others as you would. The golden rule is more valuable than somebody says, I don't have those rules.
Right.
So do I think it's particularly Orthodox? I think Christian would be the same thing. Anybody with values.
What are your key criteria for a good investment?
Real estate should be about investing. There's a very big difference between investing and speculating.
Mm-hmm.
I think that people are going to come back to the office. That's speculating.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think malls will go back into style. That's speculating. So I would say, if you want to know, to me, it's about investing as opposed to speculating.
I love that. I think that's smart and easy for my audience to take away. From 2009 to 2013, you went through quite an ordeal over your company's purchase of the extended stay hotel chain that cost your company and you personally hundreds of millions. How did your Judaic learning support you through that adversity, and what did you learn from that whole experience?
It turned out to be very valuable. If you're a religious person, almost any faith, and you say, look, I'm a child of God's. I have a mission. I'm one of a kind. I mean, Judaism teaches us one of the most essential parts of Judaism is Adam Nivra Yechidi. That means every person is a one-time creation. Nobody, Jonah, from the beginning of time till the end of time, will ever have your DNA, will ever have your fingerprints, the shape of your ear, etc., etc. Every person is a one-time creation. And he certainly wasn't brought here to buy buildings. Right? So when we look at our lives and we say, I have a mission, I'm brought here for a reason, I'm going to give an answer. There's a great accountant in heaven, better than the big four. Right? So when you lose money, it's devastating. But it's devastating to one part, one carrot, one facet of who you are. And the rest of you could say is, I'm a wonderful father. I'm a wonderful husband. I study. I'm a good neighbor. I'm religious. I have faith. I try to help the next person. And you know what? And I really had a terrible mistake over here.
Did you have this view of it as you were going through it? Or was this something you realized sort of after the fact as you're trying to talk yourself out of, anxiety over what's going on?
No, I absolutely had it at the time. In fact, part of what I do is, since I publish, is I study Torah, right?
Right.
My best studying was those years. I said, you know what? There's just too much noise out there. I would lock myself in my study and go for hours. And I think it's a very powerful message.
You said just a few moments ago that, we're not here to buy buildings. We're here for a mission.
Right.
How would you define that mission?
I think everybody has their own mission, right? You can have the mother whose job it was to bring up fabulous kids who are going to have an impact on the world. You can have somebody like you who's trying to say, wow, let me explain to so many people what being Jewish is all about, right? So everybody has their unique mission, and nobody's mission is like the other person's, right? And I think that it's so important to remember that, because sometimes a person feels like, who am I and what am I doing? And I'm all depressed. That's a terrible mistake. Remember, you are here. You are unique. You are one of a kind, and there was never anybody like you. You have your mission. You may have to search for it, but it's there.
That's beautiful. It's good positive thinking.
Yeah.
Have you ever faced challenges being an observant Jew in the business world, like missing an opportunity because it's a holiday or something like that?
I would say the opposite. I would say that I have a lot of friends who've gotten totally burned out and smoked because it's really tough to run a big business.
Sure.
Right. But when, Shabbat comes, and whether you want it or not, the world is off.
Right.
And it's one day of total return to self. I mean, the word Shabbat means to return. Right. And it said God returned. Well, where did he return to? Where was he? And the answer was, when you create, you become involved in what you're creating. And when you stop creating, you return back to yourself. So I think that it's an advantage in the respect that it's a total deplug. It's a total defrag. It allows the body to renourish itself. And the greatest alienation that we have so much of in our generation is not alienation from God, not alienation from man. The greatest alienation that we have in this generation is alienation from self. That when people are living on TikTok and scrolling, and they never spend time with themselves.
That's right.
And Shabbat is to return. Return to who? To you.
I love that. That's great. You may not have attended college, but you did spend 5 years studying at Yeshivas Mir,
Right.
a Jewish learning community with an amazing history that runs from Belarus to Japan to Shanghai and finally Brooklyn and Jerusalem. What can you tell us about this special place and what you gained from your time there?
The Mir is and was famous for its intellectual acumen. And it's where the smartest Jewish people go to debate. And the noise level and the history of debates. And remember, they're debating Talmud.
Right.
So they have over there a century and a half of Talmudic conclusions from prior professors, from prior rabbis, from prior yeshivas, that they are attacking, examining, and this and that. So if you enjoy study, if you enjoy debate, if you enjoy enlightenment, it's like a circus. It's like being in heaven. Some of the best years of my life was spent there.
And just for my listeners who don't know, will you break down what the Talmud is?
Yeah, the Talmud is, we have the Bible, the Torah, right? But the Torah in itself is very difficult to understand. It's mostly metaphors.
Right.
Right? Keep the Shabbat. Like, what does that mean, keep the Shabbat? So it's the oral law that comes along with it that explains the Torah, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the oral law was first codified as the Mishnah around in the year 500, give or take that period, maybe a little earlier, maybe 400. And then for the next 300 or 400 years afterwards, the Talmud then took every word of the Mishnah and just bloodied it out. Like, what does this mean? Just constant
commentary on the commentary.
Commentary, yeah. And then the commentaries continued further down. And that's how, so much of our lives are not Talmudic if you just read a Talmud, like electricity. How long has electricity been around? Edison discovered electricity 100 years ago, it changed, right? So how do you react to electricity?
Mm-hmm.
So it's all about extracting proofs from prior situations and bringing them into this one.
Love that.
So somebody says, aren't you lonely in your study for hours? I said, I open up the Talmud and I get stuck and I look on the right-hand side and Rashi, that's a commentator from around the year 1100, has an opinion. He speaks up. Then I look on the left side of the Gemara and the Tosafos, who lived post Rashi, they disagree and they're both arguing. I said, geez, that's interesting. Then I open up Maimonides and he has this whole different opinion. He lived in Spain and in Arabia. He looked at the Talmud totally differently. Then I look at the commentators and 15 minutes later, my study is full of 50 people all yelling at each other, all debating and all bringing proofs, and everything of the day just goes away. It just disappears.
I love that image. You were telling me about a new endeavor you're involved with. That was actually before we started rolling, so I'd love for you to mention it now.
So many kids today have discovered they're Jewish on October 7th.
Yeah.
But they don't know what Jewish means. And guess what? Their parents don't know either.
Mm-hmm.
Their parents know they make a Seder, they go to temple on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and that's about it. Well, it's very hard to embrace something where I'm only against, Well, I'm going to show them that the Jews are. You need something more essential. You have to have a gravamen that you believe in that is greater than I'm against. Like I hate when people say, and I had X number of kids just to show Hitler. And I said, really? Well, it's like your kid's name is anti-Hitler 1, anti-Hitler 2, and anti-Hitler 3. That doesn't feel like a meaningful reason to have you know what I mean? I think we have to embrace something because there's real value there. And there's nothing. There's very little. I mean, I check TikTok. There's almost nothing there.
Yeah, there's very little Jewish content.
So I said, I am going to try to create a yeshiva for Jews who know nothing about Judaism, but who are interested. And do it in a way where you have to know absolutely nothing.
So trying to make it really accessible from the ground floor.
Yeah.
I relate so much to what you just said that the impetus for this podcast really was wanting to do something that was not just being reflexive and defensive as we've been so much over the past year, but being proactive and celebratory about Jewish identity and sort of getting back to like our core mission of just, you know, being loudly and proudly Jewish.
The Chida he lived in the early 1800s. He writes in one of his commentaries on a certain verse in the Bible, he says there's a sixth book of the Torah being written now as we speak. And he says, we'll be finished when the Messiah comes. And you know what's going to say in that book? All the people who handed over the keys to the next generation and kept the chain alive. So when that book comes, the last book, one day when we open it, when the Messiah comes, you may find your paragraph there.
One can only hope. So you've covered really interesting topics. I went through a few of your podcast episodes. I mean, Ozempic, using Alexa on Shabbat, LL price gouging. Clearly, you and your audience are engaging with the modern world. What is the process you apply to understand if Jews should engage with these aspects of the modern world or not?
I don't think we have a choice. I mean, you know, somebody once said we shouldn't be on the internet. And I said, it's like, the internet is like oxygen. It's like not saying I'm not going to use electricity. I mean, these are all things that are part of our lives. We have no choice but to engage in them. And if we ignore them, it's at our own peril. Take every one of them. I mean, price gouging. Well, you're flying, LL. Ozempic, somebody you know needs it. Being obese is very dangerous.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So these are all things that, by their very essence.
Am I wrong in saying that there are some within the Haredi community who would feel like they shouldn't engage with any of this stuff?
I think that there are topics that I cover that are particularly controversial to the religious world that they would feel should not be engaged. So I would say it's 70 or 80% they would, and the 20% topics they wouldn't. There are many Haredi rabbis who won't come on to the program because we discuss these cutting edge topics.
Wow.
Yeah.
How does that feel? Or what do you make of that?
You know, I want to tell you something that the Torah teaches us, and it's very important. Never outsource your self-image to third parties. You're not right because people tell you you're right, and you're not wrong because people tell you you're wrong. You're right if you're doing the right thing, and you're wrong if you're doing the wrong thing. And if you don't live by that premise, you're a prisoner to the entire world.
I like that.
And I tell you why it's so important.
Please.
Abraham is called Avraham HaIvri. And what it means is the entire world is on one side of the river, and he was on the other side of the river. He's the first dissenter of humanity. You can't be a dissenter if you live waiting for the approbations of other people. So it goes to the essence of who we are. If you're Jewish and your life is focused around what others think of you, you're missing one of the essential caveats of Judaism.
I hope a lot of people hear what you just said within our community, because it's certainly a needed lesson today when we need, you know, every Jew to be standing up together in this moment, and many so concerned with what others think of them are not.
Yeah.
Is there an episode that sticks out as having been one of your most impactful for your audience that, you know, you got a lot of really grateful response from?
I think some of the episodes that we did, when we started talking about child molestation, which was a total topic that you weren't allowed to speak about. And I got leading rabbis on to talk about how it's, you know, these are killers, people are murderers. And yes, you should be going to the authorities, and it's, you know, and that you should be talking to your children about it. I think it turned the corner. For many years it had been, and it changed the entire outlook.
And you're talking about within the Haredi community?
Yeah, within every community. Every community, the 10 commandments, you shall not steal, you shall not kill, you shall not be sexually an adulterer. These are given to Jews. They weren't given to non-Jews. Mm-hmm. The non-Jews are welcome to have them too. So when we say, what, there's somebody in the Orthodox community who was a murderer? Well, that's what the Bible says. It predicts it. So of course there are people who are ill and they molest children, and they're going to be in every community. Mm-hmm. But there was a certain element in our community that held it's demeaning for us to talk about it. Well, it's more demeaning if it's going to happen to the next kid.
Yeah.
That's more demeaning. So it's balancing which is more impactful, which does more damage.
I mean, it seems like a pretty easy decision to me. What is the strong argument in something like that for not, wanting to protect children versus it's demeaning to discuss?
I think that talking to children about sex has to be done really carefully, and it's dangerous.
Sure.
Because once the genie is out of the bottle, it doesn't go back in. Mm-hmm. So we live in a hypersexualized society. All the celebrities are how beautiful they are and how attractive they are, and who's marrying who and who's having an affair with who. So there was sort of like the third rail, we don't want to talk to our children about this. And it took very intelligent educators to say you can talk to your children about it without talking about sex, like talking about nobody's allowed to touch you in an area that's covered.
Yeah.
And if an area is, so it was an evolution.
Mm. Well, I'm glad we got there. What about a really controversial episode, something that sticks out that sparked a lot of debate?
Well, whenever you speak about the army, it creates a lot of debate because, as you know, most of the Haredim won't go to the army.
Right.
Right. Anytime you speak about gays or etc., these are hyper, sensitive issues. There are a few others, but those come out. Women in Halakha. Mm-hmm. These are very, areas that you have to be tread on very carefully and very thoughtfully. But whenever you do it, there's always going to be somebody who's insulted, who's hurt, who thinks you were too open, you were too closed, etc.
This summer, there was a fascinating episode that I listened to, which you weren't the host of, but I still want to get into it with you, called What Should We Think About Non-Jews and the Non-Jewish World? To sum up a 2-hour episode for my audience, the idea was basically that Jews should maintain warm, generous, respectful relationships with non-Jews, but also keep a distinctly separate existence. Why? If we keep to ourselves and our traditions proudly, non-Jews will respect us and leave us alone. And B, intermingling with the Goyim outside of some specific practical purpose automatically creates more opportunity for the possibility of intermarriage and the dreaded disappearance of the tribe. In the episode, there's a story told of a mother superior who said that the Orthodox Jews always crossed the street or avoided eye contact with her when they saw her, except for one rabbi who was the nicest, friendliest guy she'd ever met. So while that rabbi is obviously the one to model, what does it say about the difficulty of being taught to remain separate, but also needing to safeguard against being seen as condescending or too aloof or disconnected from society as a whole?
Whenever you have tension like that, it requires balancing. But when you consider 70% plus of Jews today are intermarried.
Really?
Yeah, Google that, 70%, which means their children will or won't be Jewish. You know that in the census, the prior census, there were 6.7 million Jews. Mm-hmm. The one directly following, there were 5.2 million Jews. 1.5 million Jews.
This is in the United States?
In the United States disappeared.
Whoa. And
they disappeared into the colleges and into the Ivy League and into ignorance so their parents had died on the sword, literally fallen on the sword to avoid that. And today, with friendliness, we can accomplish so much more than with the Jews we were able to do with the sword. Masada, they killed themselves.
Right.
And today, a warm smile, let's go to the bar and this and that. And the next thing you know, the children aren't Jewish anymore. If you look at us as a whole, we are disappearing. Those who aren't disappearing are those who put up gates. Now, gates are very stressful. You want to be friendly. When the Torah teaches us, when it says man is made in the image of God, the non-Jew is made in the image of God. Mm-hmm. So now you have people who are in the image of God, right? And you have to love, But on the other hand, the other side of that is, will my grandchildren be Jewish? So that's a real tension, and some people handle it better and some people handle it worse.
I can't help but, feel there's some middle ground. I am myself an example of that middle ground. I fell in love with someone who wasn't Jewish, who now is Jewish. We're raising our kids very Jewish, and she converted, and Orthodox conversion, the whole shebang. So, and that happened because, my Jewish identity is so important to me, and I brought it up with her on our very first date, that if this went all the way, would you be open to talking about converting? Because if not, then we're going to have a problem here. So, I'm living proof that there is some middle something that we're not tapping into fully, because there is that very real fear and clearly based in statistical evidence that, there's a danger there, but it also feels like we're not quite open to another possible alternative route.
So I would just go back to statistics again. You're the anomaly. When it says 70, I think it's 72 or 73%, and the disappearing census numbers and the disappearance of, the reform movement, how they don't have a minyan anymore, et cetera, et cetera. It's like anything else. There are people who have strong willpower, who had great education maybe at home. But once you open that up, you're opening it up for the guy who had no education at home and whose father really didn't have much of a feeling about anything.
Right.
No nation from the beginning of time has ever been more committed to a belief that time and time again they've died for. And we look at the destruction of the temple. You look at going back to the Crusades, all the pogroms of Martin Luther. You go back to Helmanitsky, and ultimately all the pogroms of the late 1800s and 1900s. And then now what's going on in Israel. I mean, and when you think of the amount of what we call in Hebrew Mesirat Nefesh, which means dedication and devotion, right, to keep the candle alive, a lot of them are saying is, we're going to err to the side of safety.
But then it brings up this interesting question for me. If all Jews stayed totally separate, we wouldn't have the advocacy of all the assimilated Jews who are able to use their relationships and presence within the secular world to, be on the front lines when shit hits the fan. As you mentioned, in Israel, we see this kind of writ large when the ultra-Orthodox refuse to serve in the IDF. They literally owe their lives to more secular Jews who are willing to do what they are not. So how do we reconcile the halakha with the real-world necessity of having some Jews who are intermingled within the non-Jewish world or more secular world?
I think that the irreligious Jews of this country play an invaluable part for the survival of Israel through legislation, getting arms to Israel, et cetera, right? Invaluable. And the soldiers in Israel, who many, some who are not religious, some who are. My son-in-law was in the army there, and he's certainly religious. Play a tremendous. But I also understand the one who says, I'd rather my kid look like his grandfather than look like Michael Bloomberg and advocating for Israel. So it's not to say that you can say that I want my kid to look, and at the same time recognize that those who leave, if they stay connected, that's the best imaginable thing.
What role do you think the Orthodox community should play in today's fight against the explosion of anti-Jewish bigotry that we're seeing around this country and around the world? Because, far from being more respected, the Orthodox as our most visibly Jewish community are the ones who are getting targeted by violence the most.
If you asked an Orthodox person this, he would say, look, I'm just afraid of God. It's his business. Let him figure it out. Could we do some things? Yes, we do. But ultimately, God runs the world. I think there's real faith over there. And maybe part of that real faith is that the other 5 million Jews in America who are extraordinarily successful as a group, they'll, put their shoulder to the wheel, right? So I think that the Jews are very comfortable with dialectics. We're very comfortable with 2 different voices at the same time, right? And it's not a contradiction. You know the story, this couple comes to the rabbi and they say, we're not getting along, we want to get divorced, we're fighting. So the rabbi says, okay, tell me your argument. So the husband says, she doesn't cook. And he says, you're right. That's really, and he says, what do you, well, he does this and he does that. He says, Rabbi looks at her and he says, you're right. So you look at him and he says, and how could we both be right? And he says, you're right.
Yeah.
So we're very comfortable with multiple voices, multiple messages. It says when God gave the Torah on Sinai, everybody heard the voice. But the Talmud says everybody heard the voice differently. Everybody heard the voice according to who they were, what their mission was, and what their story is. Everybody writes their own book. So it's a contradiction, and that's not a contradiction.
Mm-hmm. How has life, if at all, changed for you since October 7th?
Well, I never imagined I would be pro-Trump before.
I know you were a big Democratic donor.
Yeah, big Democratic donor. And I just say, it's Israel's survival is at stake. I raised money for Israel, right? I just had dinner 2 nights ago with the majority leader to discuss Israel. So advocacy, finance, prayer.
What about, emotionally, psychologically, has there been what's the feeling been for you over the past year?
People are talking about how there's so much anti-Semitism,
mm-hmm.
right? And I have a friend, he's the president of a bank, Bank OZK, and he said, David, this hasn't created any anti-Semitism. The anti-Semites, right, who was never believed politically correct to come out,
right,
this has given them a voice.
Right.
So to me, there's a good part about it too. I mean, it's uncovered what's going on in the Ivy Leagues. Nobody had an idea. They were sending their kids there, and the kids were coming back changed. I had kids. I have 3 kids who went to Columbia. And, they come back and you don't know what it is. And then you find out what they're teaching.
Yeah.
And kids absorb this. So I think it's that, knowing who your enemies are, and there's lots of them, And when people say, like, how could you say that? 43,000, Palestinians were killed. And I said to one woman who in the West Side who was screaming, I said to her, you really love the Palestinians? Like, you love the day. Did you protest when Assad killed 600,000 of his own people? He gives them, which is 15 times the amount of 400. Did you protest when the Houthis killed 400,000? Did you kill when South Sudan and North Sudan killed 700,000? Did you protest when the United States went into Iraq looking for weapons of mass destruction, WMD, right, and they killed 300,000 Iraqis? Like, were you protesting then? So when 1/50th of this amount is getting killed, now you're in tears. Let's be honest. Is it really the kids that are bothering you? And the answer is that the Jews have accomplished great things. There's always been anti-Semitism. In the United States, it's more than ever because of the success of the Jews. I mean, if you look at the Forbes 400, I think it's maybe 150 are Jews, right? Which is not such a good thing because most of our contribution historically has been intellectual contribution. But it creates anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. And this allows them in a politically correct way, like the New York Times and the Washington Post, just to rain hatred on Jews from a politically correct balustrade.
Yeah. How has your relationship, if at all, changed with the greater American Jewish community since October 7th?
I love the greater American Jewish community. I would give them my kidney. I mean, I would do anything. It doesn't matter whether you're religious or irreligious. You're a child in the eyes of God, and, who knows? And I'll share with you a story. When I started in business, it was 1989. I bought a building in Newark. And the city didn't pick up the garbage. And they picked it up to the right of me and to the left of me. And I called them up. It was costing me $10,000 a month. It was killing me. A long time ago, $10,000 is like 25 today.
Yeah.
And they said, look, this is in Newark, there's no rhyme or reason. It's been this way for 50 years. So I called my lawyer. He said, sue them. I said, how long will it take? He said, 10 years. I said, I'll be bankrupt by then. So a guy said to me, here's something really weird. The head of the sanitation department in Newark, his name is Mike Krieger, and he's Jewish. Maybe he'll help you. So I made an appointment. I go there. There's not a single, Jewish white person in the city. I go to him. There's an old Jewish guy there. And we start talking. And I say, Mike, what are you doing here? He says, I'll tell you. I was studying for the bar. I had saved up. I was married. My wife was expecting our second kid. And I read about how in Israel, Nasser says they're going to throw the Jews into the sea. This is in 48. Mm-hmm. I don't know who was in, but they're going to throw the Jews into the sea. And I had lost family in the Holocaust. And I said, that's terrible. They have no weapons. Their whole kibbutzim, they're armed with a knife. So me and a friend rented a truck. We started going to gun shows, and we filled up an entire container of guns, and we wrote on it furniture, and we shipped it to Israel. And we did it 4 times. He says, I'm still studying for the bar. It's 2 weeks before the bar. There's a knock on my door. My wife comes in. She's all shaking and pale. There's 2 men here for you. Blue suit, blue face, blue nose, blue badge, FBI, gun running. So he says, they brought me in front of a judge. And the judge says, Krieger, are you Jewish? He says, yeah. He says, the last thing we need is another Jewish lawyer. But he told me word for word, if you agree never to sit for the bar, I'll write this down to a felony. I came home, and my wife said, what are you going to do now? I didn't have money to go back to school for something else. I opened up the Newark Star Ledger, and there was an article, an advertisement. Newark Sanitation Department looking for an assistant so-and-so. And he says, David, I've been here for 40 years. And I looked at him and I said, this is one of the most religious people I ever met in my life. So you really don't know who's religious. So when you say, how has it connected me to the rest of our Jewish brethren? Don't look at the cover. These people, many of them are doing the most remarkable things.
What's the emotion right now? You're really connected to that story.
I think it's a very Jewish story because it's a story about essence over ritual. It's a story about commitment. It's a story about a sacrifice, right? That came from a place that was almost higher than ritual. It went to the source. That's very powerful.
What advice would you give to people who are interested in supporting Israel financially and investing in their future right now when, their economy is in trouble?
Well, I would just start to say, the Israelis are going to figure this out. They have no choice. They're the smartest people, right? They're going to keep minting tech companies, and they're, what's going to, the takeaway from this is the world sees is that their weapon systems are the most advanced, their radar systems are the most advanced. I'm convinced, that the Jews will figure this out. They always have. We as a nation have always stuck together. We've always been the dissenter. We've always had the courage to stand alone. I promise you, Israel will figure this out. Their companies will be healthy. You will make money. Stand up. Be a Jew.
I think a lot of people lose sight of what you just sort of pointed to, that notion of our people standing together as dissenters, because in today's society can feel within the community so fragmented. But when you take a step back and look at it from that more macro historical view, of course, what you're saying is true. And that's why we're still here today, because time and again, over and over and over, we stand up.
Correct.
And I think that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, the new year is around the corner. It's almost upon us. What is one of your personal resolutions, and what are your hopes for the Jewish people in 2025?
One I told you about, I want to open my TikTok yeshiva.
Right.
And it's going to be a really hard job because I went through TikTok and I went through 8 out of 10 are pretty girls.
Right.
I'm not a pretty girl. And my message is not about a pretty girl.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's really trying to find, market fit.
Right.
And it's not going to come easily.
Right.
But here's another Jewish thing, right? People, the Jews know that good things, the song of the Sabbath in Psalms is about the growth of the sequoia tree, the cedar tree. The righteous man is like the sequoia. And what does that mean? Have you ever seen the sequoias?
Oh, yeah.
They grow
California.
300-400 feet tall. But here's what people don't know. They can grow a foot a year. Great things take a long time.
Mm-hmm.
We're comfortable taking long times. We are the original long-term investors. We are waiting for the day, the end of time. So the Jews, the Sabbath says, we are the longest-term investors. And with that attitude, I hope I can be successful.
I hope that as well. What about for the Jewish people?
I think that for the Jewish people, we have something that is so valuable, that is so rare, that is so one of a kind, right? And we've sold it, right? We've given it up for Oprah, right? For YouTube, right? And I would hope that we can use this as a way, as a catalyst to look inside ourselves and say, what does it mean to be Jewish? Let me discover what it means to be Jewish.
Right.
And lean back into yourself and say, let me discover something about my past. A past that 25% of Nobel Prize winners are Jewish, right? So the religion that both Islam and Christianity evolved from,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, math, science, what is in it, and what can I learn, and how can I shake that really shallow patina that my life here in the U.S. has put me into? And how do I self-reflect?
Okay, so to wrap things up, we're going to do a little lightning round. I'm going to throw a couple of just easy fastballs your way. What's your favorite holiday?
Yom Kippur.
Why?
If you want to speak to Trump, it's $5 million for 6 minutes. It's like a going rate, right? FaceTime is really valuable. There's one day a year we get to speak to God one-on-one. How valuable is that?
You don't feel we get to speak to him whenever we want?
It's much closer. I mean, this is, sending a letter to the White House, somebody will read it to the president. Here you have FaceTime.
What's your favorite Shabbat pastime game?
My favorite part of Shabbat is sitting down with everybody by the table and throwing out an intellectual question and just, I think this, and you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it goes crazy. It goes sometimes for hours. It's like the debate, the discussion, that to me is the most, and it's can only be accomplished with no phones, no social media.
Right.
This is it. And I have people who've come to my house and they said, I can't remember the last time I went for 3 hours without checking my phone.
When you have challah, do you rip it or do you slice it?
We slice it, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people by the table. So I may enjoy ripping it, but I don't know if that other person there on the table is going to enjoy ripping it.
So it's a conscientious move.
It's a conscientious move.
Love
yes.
that. Who's your favorite old rabbi I've never heard of?
Rabbi Akiva Eger. He was one of the greatest scholars in Judaism in the last 1,000 years.
What's your favorite Christmas Eve meal?
To me, it's like
any other day?
It's any other day. I wish them well, and, it's any other way. Do you know why Christmas comes out when it does, right?
I don't.
It's 8 days before New Year.
Mm-hmm.
So his bris was on New Year.
Huh. Makes sense.
Interesting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of New Year, what's your favorite place to spend New Year's Eve or way to bring in a new year?
To me, it's meaningless, honestly.
Right.
I'll tell you, look at the Jewish New Year and look at the non-Jewish New Year.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine two people running a race. One has a knapsack full of rocks, and one has no knapsack. Who's going to win that race? Judaism is about the person living his best possible life. The one-time event who is you, total fulfillment, using all your potential. And we want a new year, let go of the rocks, because we're expecting great things from you, and you're not going to be able to accomplish them if you weigh down with all that negativity. So our Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is about al-Chet, forgive me, forgiveness, people who've hurt you, people you've hurt your relationship with God, so that you stand up after Yom Kippur and you say, it's a new year, and I'm ready to run. So the new year in Times Square, it's a lot of fun, etc., to watch, but it's meaningless to me.
Thank you so much. This has been a really meaningful conversation. I know I've learned a lot. I'm sure my audience has learned a lot. So really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much to my guest, David Lichtenstein, for sharing his knowledge and wisdom with us, and the folks here at Hoff Studios and Tribeca for being such awesome hosts. There will be no new episode of Being Jewish next week. We're taking one off, just one, to ring in the new year. My amazing team deserves a break, and so do you. Go sit on a beach, be with your family, get drunk, whatever it is you like to do. And let us all head into the new year not praying for a better one, but committing, each of us, to what we will do to ensure it's a better one. I'll see y'all back here in 2025 for the next ass-kicking episode of Being Jewish with me, Jonah Platt. Happy New Year! Love you guys.